Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the session about optimizing network connectivity to Office 365. This is one of the unique sessions in this conference where we combine networking and application concepts in one sentence. So let me take a quick look on what we have here in the audience. How many of you are considering yourself productivity or collaboration-focused people responsible for supporting collaboration technologies and productivity technologies in your environments? All right, the majority. And how many of you attribute yourself to hardcore networking community who can debug a BGP session in their sleep? Interesting, I said BGP and a couple of hands went down. So the objective of today's session is to try to reason on some of their networking connectivity endeavors and the impact that it has on Office 365 productivity experiences. So hopefully we'll be able to kind of marry both sides of the world for the greater good. My name is Konstantin Rytkin. I'm in the Office 365 product group. And before joining the Office 365 product group, I actually spent a number of years in Microsoft IT, running and supporting productivity applications such as Exchange and SharePoint for Microsoft internal user community. And one thing I learned during my Microsoft IT experience is how important it is to deliver great user experience, which I think the majority of you people in the room are directly or indirectly responsible for the same thing for your business. As the productivity applications are moving to the cloud, we learned a very important lesson that in addition to having a great product, which is a prerequisite for the excellent user experience, users need to be able to reliably connect and consume that product. Which brings us to the topic of this conversation that really users need to have optimal connectivity to the cloud to experience that great product and actually get the promised excellent user experience. Now let's take a look. This session is largely focused on networking for the enterprises. And networking is important for the enterprise experience with Office 365. It touches so many areas. It touches performance. It touches availability. It also goes to important areas such as cost and complexity. We're actually seeing in the last couple of years that networking and connectivity to the cloud is indeed a challenging area for enterprises. The customer choice of networking connectivity is also driving the ultimate success of user experience with Office 365. That's why a few years ago we started having these conversations focused specifically on networking choices, on design patterns, on optimizations, so that the productivity audience that we have today in the room can have a powerful discussion with the network team in order to optimize the enterprise connectivity for the optimizations of user experience as well. And then again, this session is focused on enterprise challenges. We're going to review some models, study some best practices, look at some strategies. I want to reflect on some of the trends, as well as reflect on some of the investments that we're making on the product group side to make their connectivity story specifically for SaaS, specifically for Office 365, as optimal and as easy for our customers. All right, so let's set some context. This conference has quite a number of sessions about networking. Our Azure colleagues are delivering very powerful technology and updates. And on the Office 365 side, we're also telling our part of the story. So I think it's important to kind of set some ground rules which type of their cloud we are going to be focusing today. Conceptually, many customers are going to the cloud and consume multiple workloads. You have infrastructure as a service on one side of the spectrum and software as a service. Office 365 is a prime example on the other side of the spectrum. And one of the core principles that we'd like our customers to internalize is that the type of the workload that the customer is intending to consume, and there could be multiple, but the type of the workload is largely determining the type of the optimal connectivity that you want to establish. These pivots are rooted deep inside the nature of different types of cloud services. So for example, if you are going to the cloud and consuming a classical IaaS type of deployment, this deployment is largely focused on the builder's experience. IT professionals build their own solutions inside the IaaS cloud. On the SaaS side, it's largely about users consuming and customers extending the pre-finished applications, such as Office 365. There is not a lot of infrastructure to build in the cloud in order to make your Office 365 experience a success. On the infrastructure as a service side, the cloud tenancy starts at the infrastructure level. On the SaaS side, the tenancy starts at the application level. So these are very important differences that will ultimately drive the type of the networking choices. When you're on the IaaS side of the aisle, it's all about location. That is literally the first choice that you have to make in order to consume any type of modern IaaS infrastructure. You select a region, or hopefully multiple regions. In the software as a service cloud, the experience is highly distributed. Yes, you may place your tenant inside a particular region for compliance purposes, for example, but the user experience consuming the collaboration services is highly distributed. We'd like to refer it as location-less. It's everywhere. And then finally, on the infrastructure as a service, the nouns that IT professionals operate are somewhat different. It's largely about concepts of region, gigabytes, virtual networks. On the SaaS side, the jargon is drastically different. It's all about users. It's about productivity. It's about collaboration. And all these differences, they actually do have a fairly unique projection to the type of the networking connectivity that the customers should establish to these both sides of the cloud. On the IaaS side, the workloads are optimized for private network connectivity. Our Azure colleagues are talking about VPNs and ExpressRoute as the recommended way to consume IaaS services. On the software as a service side, from the Office 365 perspective, we optimize deeply for delivering the service across the internet. In fact, we're going to talk about some of these optimizations and the reasons why from the Office 365 side, as most of the other SaaS providers, we do recommend investing in internet connectivity to consume SaaS applications. And finally, on the IaaS side, the whole motion of building your infrastructure in the IaaS cloud is extending your on-premises network and extending your on-premises security perimeters into the cloud. On the software as a service side, that requires re-envisioning of what modern network is. And it also requires re-envisioning what modern security is. And we're going to discuss how there are additional dimensions that software as a service cloud introduces to the security equation. So quite a drastic change. Now, let's look at some of the trends that software as a service puts on their networking business. And some of these trends are pretty disruptive. The first one is a model changer. When the world is going to consume SaaS services, or when the customers are onboarding to SaaS services, that puts tremendous disruption on the legacy networking models. We're going to talk about backhauling and hairpinning of SaaS application traffic as one of the prime examples where the user experience is impacted the most. Internet is becoming much shorter and faster, particularly to the major cloud providers such as Microsoft. A couple of decades ago, in order to connect to an internet-facing website, you have to hop through a zillion number of ISPs with no guarantees or even likelihood of a decent performance outcome. In the modern world, companies like Microsoft do invest in internet connectivity at the broader scale. So for the majority of metropolitan areas, from the majority of the ISPs, we are literally one hop away across the internet from our user community. The next important trend is that enterprises do start adopting zero trust. And zero trust has implications that are pushing the focus away from the traditional networking perimeters, more into the cloud-native solutions spread across applications, devices, authentication, and data protections itself. That's a very big disruption that the SaaS services put on the traditional networking architectures. We're also seeing a very pronounced trend in our partner community, where the network device manufacturers are pushing the intelligence of detecting the application and offering some preferential treatment of unique application streams closer and closer to the user. That trend allows to do targeted optimizations for different application scenarios, such as Office 365. And finally, the very important trend that networking and security is also being moved to the cloud following the application. And sometimes it makes the situation easy. Sometimes it makes it even more complex, especially if these two are moving to different types of clouds. So definitely something to be aware of. Now, I want to be very, very clear that the enterprise journey for a SaaS optimal networking is a journey, right? It's not a single event. And arguably for enterprises, the job is much more complex than for consumers. For consumers, the life is easy. You connect to the internet using your commodity internet provider. There is no extensive security stack. There are no compliance requirements. Your internet is your only way to connect to the applications. And when the consumer enables a software as a service application, such as Office 365, it's largely a drop in the ocean, because for consumers, let's face it, internet consumption is dominated by Netflix, YouTube, and recreational web browsing. For enterprises, the story is drastically different. Enterprises historically have not been allowing their users to consume internet at scale. So when a software as a service application, such as Office 365, is being put on the legacy networking perimeter, which has a lot of complexities and a lot of layers, that is a recipe for the instant bottleneck. That is a theme that we're observing in the last few years continuously across many, many enterprise customers. If we double-click on the traditional enterprise topology, we also see that the enterprise network for connecting users to Office 365 is almost certainly not direct as an initial starting point, where the users are being backhauled through large distances before their connection is handed off to Microsoft and can be served by the Office 365 community. So not simple and not direct. That's the starting point that a lot of the enterprises are facing and have been facing in the last few years when they start doing their Office 365 journey. Now let's take a deeper look into what is happening within the Office 365 cloud from the networking perspective. And I want to start with a recognition that in our days, slow is the new broken. It is unambiguously true. Users are expecting more and more performance, more real-time response. Early in this conference, we announced artificial intelligence, Microsoft search investments. All of these are powered by the cloud and require near real-time response from the end-user demand perspective. Latency is being positioned as the main currency in the world of cloud performance. And once you've spent it, either on backhauling or on excessive processing at the network level, you cannot get it back. The latency tolerance of users when they consume rich applications is also decreasing. Users are no longer tolerant for a delay or a wait. In order to make it easier for our customers to consume Office 365, we're doing a lot of optimizations in the part of the topology that we refer to as the first mile. This is the distance that the requests have to travel within the Microsoft network. The experience is distributed, and we're doing a lot of optimizations on that first mile of the topology. This is where we have the most engineering influence. This is where we have the largest engineering velocity. And we are frankly motivated to make it as efficient as possible. Where we need help from this audience is the middle mile and the last mile. This is where this audience has the ultimate power to decide which design patterns to adopt, which purchasing decision to make, which type of architectures to start deploying, with the goal of optimizing their experience across multiple workloads. And the latency can be infused at so many layers there. At the WAN layer, backhauling, at the network security perimeter, especially if it's under-provisioned or not properly configured for software as a service cloud, and by a choice of ISPs who don't have either peering or routing relationship that is optimal for SaaS experiences such as Office 365. Now let's take a look at the first mile optimizations. It's always helpful to explain to our customers, to productivity people, and to the network people in the room on how Office 365 Cloud is architected, so that you can make smarter design choices on the middle mile and the last mile to make your investments future-proof. The first important thing to realize that Microsoft is running a big worldwide network. We can argue whether or not we are the biggest network in the world or the second biggest, but it's big, and it's optimized for specific application scenarios, such as Office 365, such as Bing, such as Xbox, such as Azure. So one of the main principles that we're always advocating is for customers who are consuming Microsoft services, and particularly for Office 365 customers, to get on that network first. In fact, our network has very diverse presence across major metropolitan areas. This slide shows you some statistics that has also been reflected in our Azure presentations. You want to get to the Microsoft network points of presences as quickly and as directly as possible to take full advantage of the optimizations that it offers. In addition to the network investments, Office 365 has adopted a very diverse set of application service front doors. The motion of their application service front door is an app-specific accelerator, which terminates the user connections and makes it appear that the Office 365 experience is as close to the user as possible. Some people refer to that Office 365 front doors are an equivalent of the application integrated network accelerator. And certainly from their end user perception perspective, that's certainly true. And finally, the intelligent data placement, which allows us to stage the data and cache the data inside the Microsoft Global Network for performance reasons as well. There is one very important motion that you should take away from this slide, that Office 365 Cloud, as any other modern distributed cloud, continuously evolves. And Office 365 has one specific goal in this slide, is to get closer to every user on the planet, closer at the network level, closer at the application front door level, and closer from the perspective of where the data is stored and processed. So it's a very important concept that we're continuously innovating to bring the Office 365 Cloud closer and closer to users. Now, one thing that we are putting as a custom imperative is let this continuous innovation and performance improvements accrue naturally to your user community. And the way to do that is allow the users to be closer to the cloud. Bring the user network connection as quickly as possible to their internet egress point in order for the cloud to be able to come back to you over the period of time. Now, whenever there is a conversation about network, there is always a conversation about security. Let's face it, network and security had about 2+ decades of happy marriage. So let's talk about the network trust. But I think I have a fairly modern audience here. Let's talk about the zero trust first. I think zero trust is one of the most disruptive trends that is happening in the networking community, and it is largely driven by the changes at the application layer. The essence of the zero trust is that you have to earn the trust as the application, as the session, as the scenario. The trust is never given by default. And also an important concept is that the zero trust evolution is happening not just at the network level, but at all other layers as well. Some people even call it zero trust everything. Now, how does it relate to the stuff that we're discussing here? We actually looked at the relationship between the level of trust that the enterprises put in a particular application and the network traffic to it, and the observed user performance that the users are experiencing against that application. And the relationship looks something like that. If you plot it on the graph, the horizontal axis is the level of attainable trust natively, and then the vertical axis is the amount of compensating overhead that has to spend on the networking level to cater for the degree or the lack of the trust, right? The way to read that graph is if you're having a rogue internet application, let's call it unsanctioned one, then the network has to do a lot of work in order to safeguard that user from that application. Maybe the application has to maybe the network has to perform deep packet inspection or scanning of that traffic flow. However, if you're talking about a trustworthy application, the application that your business has accepted and sanctioned, the application that maybe offers native security controls, then the level of network overhead spent to compensate for the user interaction against that app can be much lower. And lower overhead projects to lesser cost, lesser complexity, and better user experience. Now, the important part here is that on the Office 365 side, we are very motivated to shift the balance of network trust, specifically for Office 365 interactions, more and more to the right on this graph. And what this symbolizes is we're continuously shipping new features that give your security teams, compliance officers, and productivity people more native ways of accomplishing the trustworthiness outcomes on the app itself. And as a result of that, the network has to do less work in order for you to gain the same security assurances specifically for Office 365 scenarios. So you can reserve all the energy that the network has to spend on the less trustworthy scenarios, such as recreational internet browsing or users trying to access shadow IT unsanctioned applications. Now, there is also another very important trend that we have to recognize, that the applications are continuously evolving. We have to, in order to continuously innovate and deliver on their expanded user promise of the user experience. The applications often have to use proprietary data structures in order to optimize the user experience on the wire. The classical example here is Microsoft Teams, who is having a very rich media stack that adapts to the changing network conditions. That's a proprietary action that makes it very difficult for the traditional network solution to look inside and reason, for example, using the deep packet inspection engine. Another important trend is that applications are continuously evolving the protocols. Some of that is driven by performance evolution. The classical example here is QUIC and WebSockets. Some of them is driven by security evolution, such as TLS 1.3 and certificate pinning. That makes it even more difficult for the traditional network-level solution to reason and take an intelligent action on a complex and rich application in this case. And then finally, the data itself is becoming more and more encrypted. How many of you have looked into Azure rights management? Right? Quite a number of folks here. That stays encrypted on the wire, even inside the encrypted protocol. That is a very important concept to understand, that networking for rich and complex and innovative applications is losing ground to perform deep reasoning. So we need something else to compensate for that change. And we're seeing that this trend where the legacy networking perimeter turning a colorful user experience against a variety of applications into this monochromatic picture is slowly being augmented by a new basis. And this is the whole concept of the Zero Trust Extended, where in addition to the networking controls, security controls at the application, at the identity, at the device level, at the data level, are yielding the new colorful lens that, once combined, gives you a much better security assurances altogether. And just like in the color spectrum, if you combine all colors, the interception is white, which is very favorable for the security outcome. So we're definitely seeing the tides are shifting. And once this new Zero Trust approach is being projected to Office 365 scenarios, the experience is not downgraded. The experience stays colorful with the security assurances that your security and the compliance teams need. Which brings us to a very important point, that in order to achieve both security and the user experience outcomes, the connections have to be differentiated. Office 365 connections can be treated with extended Zero Trust products, while the traditional internet connections could be sent to a traditional network security solution that does perform deep packet inspection, that does attempt to perform the decryption, et cetera. So you get best of both worlds without the sacrifice in the user experience. Very important concept here. Now, we've done quite a bit of work in the last few years to make it easier for customers to define Office 365. Because the first thing that the customers raise as a question is, OK, I have my networking team ready to optimize for Office 365, but they need some definitions, and preferably in the automated way. So since about 5 years ago, we used to publish a web page with all the Office 365 URLs. Since then, we drastically simplified that footprint, and we actually packaged it in the form of the REST API. We also separated different classes of Office 365 applications in the priority-based bucket system. We call it the optimized bucket, which is largely focused on the most performance-sensitive and most trustworthiness and well-known applications, such as Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and Teams. We have the allow set, which contains a set of Microsoft-managed auxiliary services. The example here for Office 365 experience, Azure Active Directory, is very important. So that is inside the allow set. And then finally, all the additional scenarios and dependencies on maybe third-party content distribution networks is in the default set. And most of the network security people, they want to focus on whitelisting and optimizing on the stuff that they trust. And if you look at the numbers here, the optimized set is offering a very lean and focused set of destinations, all dedicated for Office 365, that allows your networking people, your security people, your partners, if they're managing the security perimeters for you, really extract the Office 365 connections, recognize them, and apply the performance-driven optimizations. Right? And we also expose that in the REST API, that both the customer teams can automate, and use for their deployments at scale. And we're continuously working with our partners and ISVs for them to take a feed of that API and simplify and automate that solution for their customers so that Office 365 optimizations could be as easy as a click of the button. We're seeing tremendous adoption of that API by both enterprises and the partner community. So this is really, really important for us to make sure that Office 365 is recognized and optimized properly on the wire. All right. Now, let's take a quick key point here that if you have only a limited amount of network budget to spend, or your network team has only limited time to perform targeted optimizations, you want to focus it on the optimized set. Again, this is a very contained set of destinations, very small set of FQDNS and IP addresses, all dedicated for Office 365. It's also accountable for the highest volume of Office 365 transactions. Our stats show anywhere from 75 to 90% of bits per second are going to that optimized set. And this is also the most latency sensitive. So if you have only limited budget or attention span of your network team to spend on optimizing the network for Office 365, the optimized set will get the biggest bang for the buck. All right, so let's take a quick look at some of the case studies. In this diagram, we have a customer who is distributed across continental United States. And we have an Office 365 cloud with multiple entry points and multiple front doors in various locations. The intent of this slide is to demonstrate that the type of the egress and where your network facilitates network egress affects not only the latency envelope to the Office 365 set of front doors, but it also affects their data placement within Office 365 cloud. So let's see what happens particularly for the Exchange Online workload. For a user in San Francisco, if they are egressing through their default data center and entering Microsoft Network in a remote location, the best case latency envelope here is assumed to be about 65 milliseconds, right? If the customer recognizes that that office in San Francisco can egress Office 365 optimized set, let's limit it to that for now, locally through a local ISP, then the Microsoft Network has a network points of presence in the Bay Area. So the latency envelope from the user to the Office 365 front door, just by allowing the traffic to egress there, is shrinking to 25 milliseconds. Now, it's a very steady signal for the cloud to actually invest in building more network peering and more Office 365 front doors in that location. And if enough people are egressing from that location, Office 365 will justify a set of front doors in that location. And the latency envelope is now shrinking even further. Now, the interesting part here is that once the efficient front door, the local to the user front door, is used, the cloud knows that the user is predominantly consuming the workload from that location. And when this happens, the cloud has an option to stage the data closer and closer to the user. So in this example here, Exchange Online will attempt to move the mailbox for that user from wherever it is made active for the majority of time to the data centers closer to the user home region. Now, it's very important that if the user travels to another country, then the mailbox will not follow the user across the compliance boundary, right? That would be a compliance violation. That's why there is an asterisk here. The data doesn't leave the compliance boundary that you established. But within the compliance boundary, which for North America, it is 80, 85 milliseconds coast to coast, there is still a very tangible gain to actually have the Exchange mailboxes pre-staged and made active in the locations that are closer to where the users work the most from. Now let's see what happens if the customer opts into a form of a private connectivity. And let's say they provision a dedicated circuit from their data center into another location on the Microsoft network, right? In this case, we're using the example of Atlanta to Washington, D.C. In this example, that dedicated connection will result in Office 365 traffic taking a longer path between the user and the front door. So the latency envelope is now increasing to 85 milliseconds, and the cloud will assume that the user is actually closer to Washington, D.C., and the mailbox will be moved closer to that location. So you'll have a negative ROI from the performance perspective. So the egress type and where you egress is extremely important. It affects latency, it affects performance, and it affects a lot of other user experience characteristics. That's one of the reasons why we are recommending direct and local escape. Now, let's look at all the choices that the modern enterprise has to architect the direct and local escape. The type of the direct and local escape may have impact, both positive and negative, to their Office 365 experience as well. In this case, let's examine the default case, where the user is being backhauled to a customer on-premise data center. That's a popular starting point for the majority of the enterprises who invested years of building their own WAN. There are newer trends where customers may choose to deploy one of the security-as-a-service solutions in the third-party clouds. In this case, their internet egress may be routed to that destination first. And if Office 365 traffic is a part of that default route handling, then their traffic will take a detour, but of a different kind. Now, we are having a lot of customers who are asking a question, I am a consumer of the IaaS service. And what if I use IaaS service as my internet gateway? What would happen if I route Office 365 traffic through the IaaS instance? And then finally, we have a recommendation about the direct and local egress for Office 365, where the critical traffic, the optimized set as the first priority, is allowed to egress locally and directly. Now, there is one very important benefit that I would like you to realize for the direct and local escape and direct and local only, is that as the cloud continues to evolve, and we are implementing roughly about one network POP a week. So the cloud is evolving at a very fast pace. It wants to get closer and closer to the user. When this happens, when the cloud expands, that user who is allowed direct and local escape benefits without you doing any extra work. So direct and local escape allows you to accrue all these benefits automatically. That's the importance of it. Now, what we thought would be interesting is to kind of put some numbers around these lines, right? A number of you in the audience are probably wondering, is like, yeah, conceptually it looks good, but how does it actually compare in real numbers? So what we did is we tried to pivot some of the telemetry that we extract from when the Office 365 is being connected by various users and try in the anonymized fashion, right? So we're not tracking the per-user experience. We're just looking at the connection latency at scale. And we try to pivot this by one of these popular paths across the representative set of customers, and we use North America as the example. We'd like to funnel it through a statistical engine so that it's more or less statistically significant. The way to read that diagram, it's kind of mathematical for the 4 o'clock session, but bear with me for a while. The horizontal axis here is the latency envelope, from 0 to, some people would argue, unreasonable, right? At 200, 250 milliseconds, users are not happy. The vertical axis is the number of requests that are happening or observed for the given path. So if we take the red line as an example, and we always like to look at the 90th, 95th, or even 99th percentile, kind of see how the worst type of experiences feel like. That's a very representative for the user happiness. So if you take a look at the 90th percentile, the red line, the default data center egress, is yielding us the 90th percentile at 250 milliseconds. That's terrible. The users are not happy, especially if they're engaging in modern productivity scenarios like Microsoft Search or SharePoint collaboration or Teams. Now, if we look at some of their other alternatives, such as using a popular security-as-a-service solution, the latency envelope at the highest percentile may be better, and so is their IaaS instance. But this is just for that particular location. And as you start scaling it out, the question becomes, how does it feel for the rest of the users? Now, if we compare it for the direct and local escape, you get another 50 to 100 millisecond gain just by opting into the green line. And then the benefit of that, as I mentioned before, for the direct and local escape, you allow Office traffic in, you wait a couple of months, maybe to a year, and the experience becomes even better, right? So now we're talking about a 20 or 30 millisecond latency from the majority of your users into the Office 365 set of front doors. So I think the key message here is that the type of the network egress that your company and your network team chooses to implement specifically for Office 365 has a drastic impact on the user latency and the achievable user experience. Now, let's take a look at some of the principles that we captured for your convenience. And we're also pushing these principles with our partners, because in the end, we want you as the customer to be able to align to these easily just by adopting one of the partner solutions. The principles are actually quite simple. The first one is, in order to optimize Office 365 traffic, it needs to be recognized. And we publish the REST API. We encourage our customers and partners to adopt this. Number two is that enabling as local egress as possible. It doesn't make sense to route Office 365 heavy volumes, latency-sensitive traffic across your WAN. It drives costs, it generates latency, and it definitely decreases the user experience. The third principle is allowing a direct escape specifically for the trusted Office 365 connections. These are the connections, again, that are high volume, that are protected with encryption. They're using proprietary protocols, so there's no need or reason to send them to a remote security stack or to a remote location. It just generates latency, doesn't provide any intrinsic added value. And then finally, we always encourage our customers to take a very balanced and pragmatic approach to security, right? We're not advocating to bypass the legacy security stack for something that is clearly dangerous for a company, such as connecting to random internet websites, but for key Office 365 applications that, again, are performance sensitive, that offer you tools and assurances for native security outcomes, going back to the zero trust model that we discussed, it does make sense to make a pragmatic decision to apply the security controls at the application layer, as opposed to continuously taxing the network layer for their assurances for Office 365 that they are not equipped to yield. Now, the story wouldn't be complete without our beloved partners, right? And we heavily rely on the partner community in order to make it easier and easier for our customers to implement those principles. About a year ago, we announced the partner program with the intention of helping partners deeply integrate with Office 365 at the principle level, as well as have a solid guidance for their customers on how to implement these principles and these configurations. And we're happy to announce the first wave of partners that have successfully completed these requirements. And we have a few more on the roadmap. So it's a very important reach for us, and we're hoping that the growing partner community will make it easier for you to implement these principles without doing the heavy lifting work yourself. Now, let's take it one step further. Implementing the proper egress for Office 365 traffic and whitelisting it across the variety of security stacks is the first and necessary step. But we have much larger aspirations. And these aspirations are grounded in the fact that when the network and the application work together and they become more mutually aware, the value is being shifted from their complex and expensive wires into their user experiences. Our vision here is allow you, as our customers, to consume mission-critical applications over commodity internet without sacrificing availability, performance, reliability, or security. This is a very, very important journey for us. For those of you who have been with productivity applications, particularly with Exchange, may recognize a very similar trend in the storage a couple of decades ago, where it was unthinkable to run Exchange, a mission-critical workload, on anything other than SAN in early 2000s, right? Now, who is deploying SANs for Exchange today? Right? Everybody is doing DAS, Direct Attached Storage, JBOD. The application became so smart that it started managing these type of outcomes themselves. Conversely, on the network level, we want to bring these smarts towards the networking layer so that the network is becoming authoritatively more and more application aware. Now, we don't want any reverse engineering patterns where the network engineer has to reverse engineer the protocol in order to extract value. We're talking about integrating with the network devices at their partnership level. And we actually have two areas of opportunities where we're intending to invest. The first one is leverage the application experience signals to tell the network devices when they're doing good for Office 365. Imagine a scenario where you have a router in the branch office, and the router is using a commodity internet links, and then is able to arbitrate between those links when the application tells that router that the user experience is suboptimal. Maybe the Teams call has just switched from high definition to standard definition. Now, this is much beyond just the standard HTTP pings, right? This is the application telling the network device when it's not happy. And our belief is that by bringing the network and the application together at the mutual awareness level, that results in the value that your users will feel at the user experience level. Another area that we are intending to invest is having a shared optics repository where the network awareness and the application awareness could be joined together in order to provide better insights, better troubleshooting ability, and better support for our customers. Those are our roadmap items where we're planning to invest very heavily. And we're happy to announce that one of the partners that we start the journey of these integrations is Cisco. Our Azure colleagues also announced this partnership on the Azure Virtual WAN side. So this is a unique opportunity for two companies to accrue value to both customers who are Azure customers and Office 365 customers. All right, now let's talk about the middle mile. Middle mile is also important. To date, we talked about the last mile with all the investments and optimizations and opportunities that we present. The middle mile is basically the choice of the ISP. And the choice of the ISP here can also impact Office 365 experience, from peering inefficiencies to routing problems to unnecessarily backhauling across the ISP network away from the Office 365 front doors in this example. Now, what we would like our customers to understand is that when you are connecting to Office 365 through a given ISP, there are a couple of patterns that are considered very, very healthy. For example, if the ISP is directly connected to Microsoft Network in the metro area or in the geographical area where your users are located. In this case, the network communications that are facilitated are following the green lines, right? They're going direct, most optimal network path to Microsoft, best user experience. And we are trying to guide our customers away from scenarios where the ISP is rerouting Office 365 traffic across larger distances, accumulating latency, or when the ISP has to hand over Office 365 traffic to another ISP, and yet to another ISP, the red lines, right? It doesn't help the user experience here, and it definitely results in the degradation of performance. And earlier on this conference, our Azure colleagues announced the availability of a new peering service in their preview mode. The peering service basically works directly with the ISPs who do exhibit the technical requirements of connecting to Microsoft Network directly, who have peering diversity, who have locality in their peering where the user communities are located, and who have the necessary peering redundancy and capacity to deliver for the best latency and performance outcomes for all Microsoft properties. So this is beyond Office 365. And again, there is a hefty set of partner community that is being evolved here to help you make the right choice. All right. So far, we talked a lot about what we are doing on our side and how we're reaching out to partners. We showed you some of the data that we reasoned on in order to be convicted about the models that we're recommending to customers. But I think everybody would appreciate if you had a little bit more transparency to the same very signal that we've been discussing previously, right? Imagine the state if you as productivity people are keenly aware when your network is performing great for your Office 365 experiences. In this case, you can pat yourself on the back saying, I delivered the best possible outcome, right? Or perhaps you want to know where your network is being a bottleneck, or where the experience is OK, but you can do so much better because other enterprise customers in the very, very similar state were able to accomplish that better result. Well, we're happy to announce that our intent is to bring that exact type of capability in the M365 portal. Again, our objective is not to teach you deep networking roots. Our objective is to provide you with enough awareness at the network level correlated to Office 365 experiences so that you can have a more powerful and focused discussions with your network teams, with your security teams on how to modernize your company network for the purpose of productivity excellence. And I'm going to walk through a couple of slides that show some of the plans that we're having in the M365 portal in that space. We're announcing a private preview program. There will be a barcode in the end that you can take a picture of and then sign up if you are interested. But in a nutshell, we are really serious about bringing the network insights in the M365 portal. And we want to make it actionable for you as the customer, right? What we're doing is we're planning to leverage the power of their telemetry. We're collecting these anonymous signals when their connections are coming to Office 365. And then we're trying to pivot this in the way that is most meaningful for you. So in this picture, you're seeing a customer who has several locations in North America. We're color-coding the network experience and the impact of that network experience to Office 365. So you can see that some of the locations are doing better than the others. Some of them are worse. We're also allowing the capability to extend that data set with additional information. Perhaps you want to clarify some of your metropolitan areas are actually 2 branch offices, and you want to be a little bit more precise in defining them so that these insights are pivoted in the way that is most meaningful for your network teams or for your own enterprise team. And we really want to show it to you in the measurable format. So there is a motion here of a network subscore, which really quantifies their current network quality and the performance in relationship to individual Office 365 applications. For example, for Exchange, this score is largely driven by latency. For SharePoint, it is largely driven by throughput. And for Teams, it's driven by a combination of factors, including the quality of service that network is delivering for the media experience. So it is very application specific. And the best part is that that knowledge is coming straight from their engineering community, which is the best audience to understand and be authoritative what is the most important part for the application itself. So no more guessing at the network layer. We are trying to come as authoritative and as transparent as possible. Now, the M365 portal will also allow you to do the drill downs. Maybe you're not happy with the color or the network score of the Philadelphia location, and you want to learn more. We definitely want to make these insights very actionable for you. So in this example, the Philadelphia is having a number of recognized networking challenges, from excessive proxying of Office 365 requests to intrusive network inspection to some peering problems. And we want to bring that awareness to you. So again, you have a good discussion with the networking team. And we're also planning to reflect on what is their potential improvement so that you can use that as a priority signal. In this case, in this example, the Philadelphia user experience was really suffering, and there is a couple of 100 milliseconds at stake that could be gained if these issues are addressed. The location drill down also allows you to visualize some of the network paths that the users are taking. Again, in this example, the Philadelphia office is suffering from excessive backhauling, where the users in Philadelphia are being backhauled half across the country into the remote proxy server, while Office 365 locations and Microsoft Network entry points are literally in the same metropolitan area. So there's a lot of gains to be had once the customer implements that direct and local egress. All right? So I'm going to give you a few seconds to take a snapshot of that barcode if you're interested to sign up there in the private preview. The last point, which was of a high demand by customers that I want to call out here, is the point where some customers are saying, it's great that you allow me their quantifiable metric of how I'm doing, but I want to also know what's achievable. How are the other enterprises doing, right? Can you give me a transparency in what other enterprises have achieved? And this view compares and contrasts the observed case for your tenant experience with other enterprises. So in this case, the Philadelphia office is really in the bottom 3% across the users who are accessing Office 365 from the same very location. And we believe that this is very important because, let's face it, most of you don't want to be good enough. You want to be the best, or at least the best possible for the situation that your enterprise is in. So hopefully, this type of transparency and data points are useful. Again, I invite you to sign up for the private preview here. But our intent is to invest further in this area and arm the productivity people with just enough data to be dangerous in the networking level discussions. I think that's our strategic investment. The last slide, I have 5 key takeaways. The first one is SaaS is disrupting the networking industry. That is very important to recognize. There is no turning back. Number two, the user experience is very important for the enterprise success with SaaS. And as Office 365 and other SaaS clouds continue to expand, you may want to unblock that accrual of those benefits through smart network choices. Use Office 365 connectivity principles as a level set in your internal network discussions and as a way to reach to your partners and connectivity providers. I think it's very important to recognize that there are a lot of partners who are natively delivering those principles through the integrations that they did in their products. Try the tools and the insights that we're going to be shipping in M365 Portal. Hopefully that gives you more ammunition in discussions with your own networking teams for the better outcome with networking efficiency, security, and productivity. All these goals are achieved. And then finally, the last takeaway or an ask, please do engage with your network and security teams. Do engage with your connectivity partners. Do engage with your security vendors to discuss these things that we talked about today that have paramount importance on the user experience. And please continue to expect and demand performant and delightful user experience for your Office 365 users. Thank you.